Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we'll explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who have found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. Everybody, this is so exciting. We are officially starting our second year of the Off the Comma podcast. It's January 2024 by the time this episode airs, and we are on episode 26 now. So this is pretty exciting for something that I had no idea where this might go and still kind of don't know ultimately where it will go. I just know it's important work to do. And I very much enjoy doing this work and being part of these stories. So we are back. I'm also very, very excited to have my first guest of season 2 and the year 2024. And we are here with Arlesia McGowan. And I am very excited to hear what she has to share with us. So I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to you, Arlesia. And I'll start with you with the same question I ask everyone at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How would you like to be known? And what would you like people to know about you?
I'm Arlesia. I'm a Dallas, Texas native. I live in New York City. Right now, I work in influencer marketing. So I consider myself like the middle person between like the brand and the influencer. But getting there was very different. I thought I was going to be a doctor for 18 years of my life. And my last year of college changed my mind and just landed in a field that I had no idea existed, communications, etc. I'm also a musician, piano player, former ballet dancer, and vocalist. I call myself multifaceted. I just have a lot of interests at heart. I'm also an entrepreneur. I have my own nonprofit called Classics Arts that's focused on diversity in the classical music realm. But I also am really passionate about just working with minority creators and making sure that they have a voice and they feel seen in the influencer marketing industry. So I dibble and dabble. I call myself a hustler, certified hustler. I just have lots of little hustles that I like to work on and very creative. I'm a visionary, resilient. So that's me.
Nice. Well, you have a big personality. You're involved in a lot of things, and
Yes.
It's exciting. It's exciting to hear already, and I can't wait to hear more about all of these parts of yourself and your story. What I'm hearing so far is we look at different adjectives you use to describe yourself as a person. I heard multifaceted, entrepreneur, certified hustler. That's a first. That's cool. Creative and visionary. Anything else you would add to the list? One or two more, if at all?
I would say radiant. I'm a pretty outgoing person. I love to get to know people. I've discovered about myself this past year. I feel like I have a knack for connecting with people, and establishing relationships and looking out for marginalized people, making sure that like they're represented the way they should be. And that is what I feel is part of my purpose here on this earth, but we're still exploring that. But yeah.
Well, it sounds like one of many purposes, right? I know the common vocabulary these days is about finding your purpose, finding life purpose, finding meaning. And I like so many people, am constantly looking for that thing. And yet it can be many things, can't it? It doesn't have to be just one thing. And you're already kind of demonstrating that to us.
Absolutely.
Nice. Well, Arlesia, one of the things that I ask every guest before we get into the 5 questions is, what would be your intention for yourself today in this conversation?
Intention for myself. Intention for myself is to authentically share my journey and, you know, I think I can tend to, overthink
Mm,
and, monitor how I express things. Just because of how I've been kind of conditioned, I feel. But yeah, just to authentically tell my story, really.
nice. Well, I support that intention because my intention is to support your intention, create a space for you to be
Mm,
able to do this. And we'll also kind of do a little reflection at the end to see how you feel about that. But to hold space for you to be able to do this because of how important it is for other people. I believe in my work and in my ways of being and through this podcast that
mhm.
we don't need experts. We need people who, in all things, I should say. Um, yeah,
Love that.
engineers are
Yeah.
experts. We very much need engineers to build bridges, right? And
Right.
surgeons and doctors and so many others. But when it comes to telling us, how to live our lives, I believe that we learn from each other and that each of us is a mirror to each other and each of us is a model to each other.
I agree.
So my intention is to be able to create that space for you to be yet another inspiring influence for someone who the words that you share may have meaning and resonate with
Mm,
someone out there who is looking for a little hope or a little bit of connection or a little bit of feeling less alone. So that's my intention, is to create that space.
love it. That's what I'm here
Nice.
for.
Well, as with all guests, you and I have not talked about what you're going to be sharing today. I'm very excited to learn, and I will ask you the same 5 questions that I do each guest. So let's jump in with the first question. Arlesia, where have you found yourself sitting on a comma in your life?
Well, multiple places. The first one, I mentioned this previously a bit, but like I said, the majority of my life I thought I was going to be a doctor. And that was a very large comma, but I didn't realize it was a comma until college. I grew up
Mm,
very, it was academically rigorous, very like education focused. And it was all about kind of those pillars like law, education, etc. Um, and I went to an institution where I feel like it was just kind of your standard go-tos. So finance, education, science, law, and I I was passionate about medicine, but I think it took me kind of exploring music and medicine in school and realizing that not I performed, but my passion came out a lot more when I was in like creative environments. Um, it was
mm,
something I really wrestled with because I also weighed the expectation of my authority figures and people around me who expected me to be I'm going to be the doctor and things like that. And I think that voice was always in my head as I was like pursuing, and also just being a black woman in like higher education, kind of like carrying that weight of that expectation and not really considering like what my expectation was for myself or what I envisioned for myself for my future. So yeah, it wasn't until my senior year of college where I don't really know what came over me, but I was doing research and combining my two majors, which was music and science. And
mhm.
I actually had to change my thesis around from being science focused to music focused. And I realized that it seems so much easier I also was really passionate about music. Like I said, like it just came easier to me. I've been a musician ever since I was a child, but it was all, I always saw it as like a side thing, like a side gig, or I'll just do it on the side. Or when I go to medical school, I'll
Mm-hmm.
just do it on the side, or I'll find a way to figure it out. But I think the question that presented in my mind randomly my second semester was, can you really see yourself like dedicated to medicine for the rest of your life? Or it just kind of scared me that I would be so fully, because medicine is a full-time job, your life has to be dedicated to it. And it
Mm-hmm.
scared me that I was dedicating myself to something that I wasn't fully passionate about. And, I
Mm.
was just sitting for, that second or a few minutes, I was just sitting with how I would feel. Like, would you be okay with this really like taking over your life and not really be able to work on your creative ventures or sing as much as you want to and things like that? And I think that rigidness scared me. Um,
Mm.
And that's when I took a hard left. Like I had taken the MCAT twice. I had done all the hours that are required to go to medical school. And that's when I just took a hard left and literally at my first semester of college, at the end of my first semester, I applied to two grad school programs unplanned at NYU. They were both
Mm.
creative related. And it was like a few days before the deadline. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to just apply to these grad school programs and see if I get in. If I get in, I'll go. And that's a sign. So I
Ooh,
applied
okay.
and I got into one of them. And I was like, well, I guess I'm going to New York. And that's when my whole life just took like a 180. I did this creative was it yeah master's in performance studies. It was a performance studies program at Tisch, where I just got to explore like theories in like music and society and other creative realms. And I also got really heavy into entrepreneurship, something I had never
Mm.
ever thought about. Okay. And discovered that I'm really passionate about creating things, not just from a musical standpoint, but like, it's funny. I was talking to my dad about this the other day, but I love to make things or make systems, or if I see something that's, you know, like I said, like marginalized communities and people that I just want to figure out a way to like help them and like, serve my community. Or I'm very big in like giving back to my community, making sure people's voices feel heard, and so I had a chance to explore that in grad school. And that's when I realized that I don't think I'm going back to medicine.
Wow. Arlesia, if I may, let me step in for just a moment because I want
Mm-hmm.
to reflect back some of all of
Mm-hmm.
this that you've shared with us. It's so rich and I hear these themes in here that show up so often. But for you specifically, you were telling us, and I'll reflect. So if I
Yeah,
misstate anything, by
for
all means,
sure.
gosh, please correct me. But um, what I'm hearing you say is that there was a path
Mm-hmm.
paved for you about
Mm-hmm.
being a doctor because you specifically referenced expectations of authority figures. And then there was also music that was a part of you and
Mm-hmm.
that you were passionate about, but you saw
Mm-hmm.
that as a side
Mm-hmm.
hustle or a side thing, right? Pursuit. And that you go into, your secondary education, your college years, thinking you're going to be one thing, but not feeling
Mm-hmm.
anything about it necessarily or feeling as passionate about it. But the other thing you're feeling passionate about doesn't seem to be a thing you can
Mm-hmm.
pursue for work or
Mm.
career. And you come to this place where so often it's preparing you for, especially in America and our society, right? It's preparing you for these next, 30,
Absolutely.
40 years
Yep.
of being in the workforce. And that's where the roads came
Mm-hmm.
to a head and then suddenly it wasn't that you were looking to make a decision, but life put the decision in front of you. That's what I believe I'm hearing you say.
That's exactly what happened. And if you would have asked me, like I have graduated from college 5 years ago in May. If you would have asked me 5 years, if you would have told me 5 years ago that I would be where I am now, I would be like, You're joking.
And I'm watching you. I know our listeners can't see you, but I'm watching you smile. Like when you said that,
Yeah.
you just grinned ear to ear, just
Mm-hmm.
nothing but pure smiling over that statement.
Right. I think it's because like I feel like I took ownership of my journey and what I saw for myself, and I acted on it. And that's why I call it a comma, because it was a huge decision. It was like I had spent years of my life and money, you know,
Mm-hmm.
working towards a field that, I was, and I'm not saying that I hated it. I love the field of medicine. I'm a big holistic medicine girly. My best friends are still in med school, like I respect the
Mm-hmm.
field so much, but I was like, I feel like I always had to kind of put myself in a box because of it. And I finally had to kind of take myself out and be like, okay, Lisa, you're not like your friends, you don't have to be like
Mm-hmm.
everybody else. I had to really accept that, like, okay, I am a creative, music, art, like whatever. Like it, I felt that I had to pave my own way, or else I was not going
Yeah.
to be happy. And that's what ultimately it came down to.
Well, and let's even go back to some things that you shared that are really
Mm-hmm.
interesting. And I'll assert some things that aren't necessarily, these are
Yeah.
my assertions. If you
Mm-hmm.
agree or what have you, there might be those out there who have opinions, but it's like what you just said about I am a creative. Your process proved it, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
specifically said, can I see myself doing this, for
Mm-hmm.
these years or what have you? How
Mm-hmm.
does this feel? And the rigidness scared me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's interesting. I'm taking a big leap here, but someone who's really passionate about being in the field of medicine, they are likely to be analytical, empirical, very necessarily, methodical and structured, right?
Exactly.
You didn't use that process to make the
Mm-mm.
decision about the journey in your life. It was very much, I love that. How does this feel? Can I see myself? Those are very creative, very intuitive processes.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like I am someone, and this is a blessing and a curse. I'm generally led by my emotions and like intuition. Like I'm very heavy on feeling. And I think that moment or those moments, it was all about how do I feel, rather than what should I be doing, and
Mm-hmm.
that is really what has led me throughout my journey. I think I'm still sitting on a bit of a comma with
Mm-hmm.
music and performing, just putting myself all the way out there as a performer. Just because I can be very critical of myself, and I feel
Mm.
like I overthink these processes, and also that I'm starting to work through something you mentioned at the beginning of we have many purposes, right? And God has graced me with like my musical talent, and I will always I've come to accept that I will always be a performer, and I'll always be a singer, and I'll always find ways to perform. But also I have this professional aspect, right? And I think it's been a battle of like, oh, what if I gave up everything and just pursued
Mm-hmm.
music, which is kind of a comma that I'm sitting on right now. Just because of like you're saying, music's not as it's difficult, right?
Well, presents a different set of challenges, is perceived in a different
Mm-hmm.
light by mainstream society, right? I try to reframe because it's easy for us who walk in the spaces that aren't quote unquote celebrated or practiced by quote unquote mainstream society to feel like we're going down a bad road or the wrong road. And it's just a different road.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
still a road, right?
Right.
This is a great segue into question number 2. So you can
Mm.
answer this either in relation to the comma you were sitting on when you were in grad school, or the comma you're currently sitting on with pursuing and continuing to pursue music. The question is, what does this create for you sitting on this comma?
Well, I feel like it definitely creates, I feel like in the past I've seen it as like, oh, I'm scared of the future, but they're all the same emotion, but just different like fields, right? And it's really just a field of like opportunity, right? And I think um that's what it in the past that's what it created for me,
Mm-hmm.
segueing into this, another field and just with a blind eye, just taking this path. Well, not necessarily blind, but I would say just like not really knowing, what lies in the future. It's opened up so many doors of opportunity for me in spaces I never thought that I would be a part of, like for example creating my nonprofit, like having a chance to like work with professionals in the industry and working in schools and teaching education about like Black classical greats and bringing light to this community, especially you know the Black musicians who also paved the way in this field, or working with influencers and creatives. Like I never thought I would be here, and I'm here, and
Mm.
I'm seeing how, you know, I would have never guessed, I guess, X amount of years ago that I would end up in this space. And it's created so many opportunities. And also, I figured it out, right? Like, I
Mm.
put that faith. I said, okay, let me have some faith in myself. And, I still figured it out, and I didn't go the path, that I thought that I should have taken. Right. And I
Mm.
think
Mm.
that's what I could use from the past and implement into now. You know what I'm saying? And I'm still trying to decide if it's not that I will never pursue music, but it's more of a comma of putting myself out there more. Like I have goals of, I want to make my own album, and I have songs that I've written that I haven't even showed to the world, just things like that, like
Mm.
believing in my own content and my own voice, right? Because I think, even as a society, we're still growing out of overthinking what we put on social media. And I'm not saying like the obvious things you shouldn't post on social media, but I'm just saying
Right.
sharing your voice, right? Like, and is it called analysis paralysis? It's some form of
Yeah.
paralysis of that, I feel like we as people have when it comes to like putting ourselves out there, and especially like creators. And that's something that I've talked to other creators about, of like overthinking your content, or, if you have something to share, like share it,
Mm-hmm.
share it and see what happens, and that's
Yeah.
that's what I'm still with my own creativity, which is music. That is yeah, that's that comma I'm over figuring out. But like I said, it's just seeing it as a field of opportunity, right? That's what it creates for me.
I'm hearing this theme of voice is resonating a lot for me. You earlier talked about the inner voice and listening to the voice. It was telling you and talking to you and guiding you and checking in with
Mm-hmm.
you and validating you. And
Mm-hmm.
now you're talking about this outer voice and the
Mm-hmm.
being courageous enough to put it out there, to overcome fears, to overcome beliefs, and still speak out. So I don't know what else to do with that. I'll put it in your hands, but it's just interesting how voice is showing up right now. And I was
Mm-hmm.
curious, before we go to question 3, you've talked about figuring it out. What happens for you in that figuring it out space or stage or phase?
It's so funny. I wrote a song called Figure It Out
Oh,
when I was
wow.
in high school. And now we're talking about figuring it out.
Wow.
But it's like a light bulb moment. It's also like a reaffirming, reassuring moment. Like, I've been slowly like dropping, like I sing in church a lot and
Hmm.
I drop things, and the affirmation is important for me because I get feedback from people that, a friend who I hadn't talked to at all this year. When she texted me Merry Christmas the other day, and she was like, I really love your singing videos. And I was like, wow, really? It's like, I didn't even know you were checking for that because I never hear from you.
Mm.
And it's kind of and it's not to show that you always need someone to validate you, but it was at that unexpected like validation of trusting my intuition, putting it out there, and it being received in the way that, I was fearing would maybe not be received or not like acknowledged. But it's a process of taking that leap of faith and seeing what happens. And then from the result or just the pure satisfaction that I put something out there, it's just like, oh, this is not as hard as I thought it out to be. Um,
Well, if I may, what I'm also hearing come up is that you put it out there, but I don't hear you describing expectations. I put it out there. I wanted it to X number of people to hear it, or I needed it to go a certain
mhm,
place or have a certain number of ratings or whatever. Like you put it out there because you needed to put it out there. And then where it lands, it lands.
mm,
Then it does land with
mhm,
someone that you kind of, it sounded like you were surprised. And it just
mhm,
goes to show like you weren't attached to any specific expectation of where or how fast or how
mm.
heavily it went. And you were still able to enjoy the surprise where and when it did land.
That is an amazing piece of insight because I wasn't even aware that I was even thinking that way. you know it's like, I listened to this performance and I was like, oh, I really love this. I really loved singing the song, and I loved like how I sounded, obviously, and I really want to just share this with the world, and
Hmm.
like just to share it because I
Yeah.
love it, right? And so, yeah, there was no expectation attached, and it's the power of not having expectations. Also, I
Hmm.
feel like that's something that I've grown through, as someone who's always been in very like high education environments, and always like maybe one of few Black people, and always feeling like there's a certain expectation as a Black person, which, unfortunately there still kind of is a
Hmm.
silent one, right?
Hmm.
But when it comes to like my music and me sharing my voice, it's not about expectations, right? It's like I said earlier, it was me following how I felt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. From a life of expectations, 18 years, to a life of testing, not having expectations, from a
mhm,
life of structure and regimentation and rigidity, to use your word, to a life of freedom, intuition, feeling, and creativity, to use your words.
yeah.
Expectations, less expectations, or striving for no expectations. It's really fascinating, these parts, um, and how they're coming together. And you're still young in your life's journey too, right? Early in your life's journey. So it's so cool to see this unfolding at this stage already in your life.
Mm,
What
yeah.
what have you learned about yourself, or what did you learn about yourself?
Well, I think I learned that I got it. I got me. I know what I'm doing. And
Mm,
I think living a life of very structured, I still use structure to a bit because a certain amount of structure I believe is healthy, but it from the day I made that decision of, not going to medical school, it showed me that you you got this. Like, you are in control of your own narrative, because at some points I felt that I didn't really know what I was doing. Because I'm like, oh, I was in this vein for X amount of years. I didn't even know public relations. I didn't even know public relations was a thing. I had no idea influencer marketing was a thing. I got Instagram in 2019. Okay. After, you know, not really being a social media girly like that. And expectations
Mm-hmm.
also coming from that, just it's very ironic. But I think it was like a another form of confidence in myself and like believing in myself, um, that came from that experience, and that I still carry with me to this day. And it's part of also being an
Mm-hmm.
aspiring, and not just aspiring, but an entrepreneur. Like, you kind of have to have that mindset of like, if it's something you believe in, go for it. Try it out. See, the worst thing
Mm-hmm.
that could happen is that it doesn't work out, right? That's the absolute worst thing that could happen.
It's many people's greatest fear,
I mean,
right?
right. But it's like, okay, and if it doesn't work out, try something else. Just keep
Yeah.
trying different ways. And it's funny because that was kind of how I steered away from medicine. I didn't really have a plan of how I was going to. I was like, oh, well, I need to get a job, but I don't really know what other field I want to work in. And it was in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
like the heat of COVID, and I was just applying to jobs that I thought I could fit, all from social media to tech recruiting to consulting. And I just fell into public relations. And I was like, this is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then a year and a half ago, I switched to influencer marketing because I was like, not really feeling, don't really think that, public relations best utilized what I'm passionate about, or, wasn't fully what I was passionate about. So switched to like working with creators. Okay, I'm a bit more passionate about that. That could change, and just, going with kind of my narrative and how I feel. And seeing where that like lands me. And like, that's kind of just how I've pursued, or that's how I've navigated to this
Yeah.
to this place that I'm at right now.
Let me ask you a question here, because I think people who are listening will let me just ask the damn question. So, because you're very much going a path, everything you've described, you're going a path that kind of defies some of our norms. We've talked about this already, right? Especially walking away from
Mm-hmm.
a medical career, doctors, et cetera. And you said very clearly, I got this, I got me, I know what I'm doing. How do you know
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing? Or how do you
I
know?
mean, it's it's a feeling. It's like, it's my intuition. It's my intuition. It's like, and I'm a very spiritual person, so I believe that God has a lot to do with this as well. But you know, I'll also say I thought I was going to get my PhD.
Mm.
That's another comma. I don't know. I could, but how I'm feeling right now is that I can't see myself in education like that. I'm not a huge writer. Like, I don't really, I think about the tasks of the job or what's required. And I'm like, am I passionate about that?
Mm.
How do I feel about having to do that for X amount of years? What is my initial gut reaction telling me? And my mom always told me, your intuition will never fail you. And it's true. I
Mm.
believe that to the core of my being. And, we all deny our intuition a lot of the time. And when I've denied my intuition, it doesn't land me in great places. But like, when I do trust, it's trusting that inner voice inside of you that's telling you you know what, maybe not, Arlesia. Maybe you didn't feel seen, heard here. I don't think you should do this. Let's go this way. And it's not literally that, but it's just kind of, it's that initial, it's that it's that gut feeling that you have that like guides you, and I really stress to listen to that however you need to, whether you need to sit down in a room with no distractions and just, or write it out. That's another good thing, like, what do you envision? I'm a big vision girly, like vision boarding, or what can you see for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not just sticking to that, but like, okay, what's your vision, and just creating that, like creating, your goals are in like your future based off of, okay, what do you feel is in the cards for yourself?
I have to say, self-referencing, I love this because I'm an intuitive as well. And even at my age, I'm still developing those skills of intuition. But I want to reflect back for you because I mean, you are trying things, you're doing different things, you're being creative, you're changing your path, you're doing what feels right. So if your path is not meant to be linear, rigid, and structured, but meant to be creative and bob and weave and ebb and flow and up and down and side to side, then you are doing exactly what you want to do. That's how you know. And you're also demonstrating another tactic or technique for people who want to test their intuition, which is you don't have to know, just try it, right? Like you can literally, you're a living example of this. Like, do I want bagels this morning or do I want donuts? Well, if you're not sure, go with what you think your gut says, do the thing, and then check in with yourself. Was that thing, does it feel right? If you still feel right after you ate the donut, then that was probably a pretty good indication. But if you chose the donut over the bagel and then the donut's not agreeing with you, then take that and then apply that the next time and the next time and the next time.
Exactly.
I love to walk. I love to walk and explore when I travel. I don't need resorts and drinks on a beachside or whatever. I get in the middle of that city and I walk these streets. And what I will do a lot of times is have no plan. I just strike out. I get myself my little coffee drink or whatever. And it's like, which direction, right or left? Check the gut. Gut says right. That's what I'm going to discover today. Okay.
Right.
Do I want this to eat or that to eat? Check. But it's a constant checking in, validating, recalibrating, right? That builds and grows over time and doesn't always what am I trying to say here? Like it will always steer you right, but every now and then it will test you.
It will. And you got to sit with that and, make what you think is best. And whatever decision you make, you'll learn from that decision, whether it was a good decision or a bad decision. Yeah. And I'm not saying like, oh, just willy nilly, There is I feel like a certain amount of calculation involved, but it all goes down to just being in tune with yourself and listening to yourself. And I think that leap I took, almost 5 years ago, it just exposed so many different valuable and beautiful skills, people, relationships, in my life that I do not regret in the slightest. And I don't regret going to school and spending X amount of money and taking these medical school courses, because guess what? It just made me more analytical, mindset in the field I am now. Yeah. Like it gave me those prowess. And, I want to say to the people who are listening right now, like if you're thinking like, oh, well, I'm switching to a whole nother field, like that just means that, I'm just doing away with X amount of years of this. Don't think about it like that. Think about what you've developed and what verticals you can take and how like what you've used or what you've learned can be applied to the next stage in your life. Yeah. Everything's connected, right?
And not only could it potentially add value, the thing that you chose not to do but spent and invested time in could add value to the other thing that you choose to do.
Exactly.
And sometimes we have to eat enough of a thing to realize we no longer like the thing. Right.
Yep.
I think back to some of the courses I took in school, thought I was going to be an architect, took drafting classes, said, hell no. But now I have a whole new respect for architects because I don't want to do that stuff. I feel like we need more of that respect in our world because you know what? I don't want to be a scientist, but I'm glad we have scientists. Right. So,
Right.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I took all those courses. I was like, I don't like physics. I do not like organic chemistry. I don't like the amount of brain power that I have to put in to this, and I'm not even getting the results that I want.
Yeah. Well, and
like,
it doesn't support the type of creativity that you really embody, right? So
that part.
it's not an indictment
Exactly.
against physics. It just means you're not the
It's
person for
not. It's
physics.
just, yeah. But I have friends who eat that up. My brother Titus, it just comes quickly. For me, I was like, well, I'm gonna go write a song.
Right. Well, but it's an acknowledgement to all people, right? Like intuition and checking in with your gut isn't just reserved for creative types, right? There are engineers, there are cashiers, there are mechanics, there are housekeepers out there who are doing the thing that they do, some because they love it, some because their gut says this is what I need to be doing right now, right? Like it's not an either or type of scenario. Arlesia, last two questions. So next one is, what has changed for you as a result of sitting on this or these commas that you've shared with us?
Yeah. What's changed for me? A lot of open doors. Like that I'd never imagined were doors, honestly. I think just growing into who I am as Arlesia, that it's not that I didn't know who I was, but it was really learning, okay, who is Arlesia? Like, what makes Arlesia tick? That changed significantly for me. Like I said, there are things like I figured that I'm interested in entrepreneurship. Never would have thought, never knew that before I, took this leap. Just acting off of faith, like it just made me it really, I feel like increased my faith, in the future and like in myself. It's allowed me to think outside the box more, be more flexible with the future and results. I've defied expectations and, been rewarded for it. So many things that I feel like I wouldn't have discovered for myself had I chose that other path. And then like right now, just processing this comma with music, it's really just kind of, putting more faith in myself and in my music and my talent and, knowing and internalizing like this is who I am, this is what I do, and it's not going to change. Right. So these feelings get like stronger and stronger as time goes on. It's just like just listening to that inner voice, honestly, that I didn't really fully realize that I had.
Last question. What does getting off the comma look like for you?
Getting off the comma, it's like, Nike says, just do it. It's action. It's action over overthinking. That's really what it is. And yeah, I'll keep it right there because it's all about action. It's less talk, more do. And that's what getting off the comma is for me, quite frankly.
Well, and it sounds like also from what you've shared that there's a certain and tell me if I'm off base here, but there's a certain permission in the acting. Like you don't always have to know exactly what that action is or where it's going or what it's going to do. Because
Mm-hmm.
you specifically
Mm-hmm.
said it opened doors that I didn't even know were doors. And so sometimes the action is fairly clear or at least well informed or somewhat intuited. And I'm going to do that. And sometimes the
Right.
action is like, well, let me try all three of these and see what I learn from these three things. Is that a fair summary of some of the things that go
Yeah,
into taking action for you?
for sure. Yeah, it's and yeah, it's like trusting in myself
Mm,
and trusting in my intuition and trusting my gut and acting on that. Yeah, so I mean it's not just taking an action, but it's taking that action from a feeling in my that comes from my inner voice. There's a book that actually helped catalyze this for me too in 2020. When I was like in the rut of applying for jobs and I just did away with the decision of not pursuing my PhD immediately or going to med school. And it's called The Dream Giver. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's by
mm,
Bruce Wilkinson. And it's basically like shows how to like identify and overcome obstacles that kind of like those obstacles that keep people in that rut of like, I don't know what to do. And it's just kind of like a modern day
mm,
fable. Starts with Ordinary, this man who's just, just a regular guy and he has these dreams. But there's certain like markers and certain people that he came across that like helped him along the way or didn't help him. And that was a book that really helped me
okay.
spearhead my journey for sure.
I'll add that to the show notes, to what you're going to be sharing here in just a little bit. Um, so awesome. Okay, cool. So as we start to wrap this up, a couple of things. So first, what would you acknowledge yourself for having now had this conversation?
I acknowledge myself for being real, being honest, um, being vulnerable, because this wasn't always something that I really was open about, um, and being authentic. Yeah,
Yeah, you lived into your intention that you stated not too long ago.
I
Yeah.
did.
And what great things came of it too, because there's so much here that I really believe people are going to be able to connect with and resonate. It will
Mm-hmm.
resonate for them. So thank you for that. Um,
Absolutely.
how can people find you, or where can people find you? Of course, I'll put it in the show notes as well, so people can click the links.
Mm-hmm. Instagram at Life of Lesia. So Life of Lesia. Yeah, that has all of my links to
Nice.
everything, projects that I'm working on, and what I'm doing.
Awesome. Cool. Well, one other thing that we do in each episode, because I believe it's not only important to hold space for this, but it's also part of your story as well. And we call it acknowledgments. And so it's an opportunity for you to give voice to any other creators, individuals, organizations, or causes that are important to you who could use
Mm-hmm.
the boost or might not otherwise get the press. And we'll include that in the show notes as well. Who would you like to acknowledge?
Yeah, first, I would like to acknowledge my business partner right now, Christina Abiola, who is the founder of Abiola Co. And Abiola Co. is a organization that I'm a part of that helps minority creators who are like nano micro influencers kind of like get their feet off the ground. We aim to give them the tools and the skills that they need to properly brand themselves and to get brand deals. So I'm super excited. We're gearing up for a program this summer. That we're going to work with, minority creators, minority female creators, and she is just so inspirational and aspirational. We have some of the same like visions and values, which is why I of like representing, marginalized voices. And she's also a beauty creator. She was former Sephora Squad, but her content is amazing. Her visions are amazing. And so if you're interested, go follow her.
Nice.
And then one of my dear friends and influencers, Raven, Beauty Maven Raven. She's also a beauty influencer, but her content is super accessible in the beauty field. There's so many options and there's so many luxe brands, but she focuses on, the drugstore brands, the brands that are very affordable for people who are beginning out in their beauty journey. So giving her a shout out as well. And then one last creator I would like to boost his name is Aditya. So he is a Middle Eastern LGBTQ beauty creator. I call him the professor of makeup because his makeup is super educational. And he goes from everywhere to how to contour your face to, how to properly set your skin for a beat makeup look, but his platform has grown expeditiously because of this. Honestly, like this past month, but I just really respect his content, and I feel like we need more voices like his. So I give him a shout out. So those are my girlies and guys.
And we will feature them in the show notes. I encourage everybody to go and check them out. And what I also love about this is these are all individuals who are starting their own businesses and their platforms and really kind of getting a start on putting their voices out there, which was kind of an important theme in what we talked about today.
Yes.
I love that.
Exactly.
Arlesia, this has been wonderful and so excited to have you on the show, especially for you to be our first episode of the new year and the new season. And I'm looking forward to you and I having more conversations offline. And thank you for bringing that voice to this platform and putting something out there that most likely, will definitely land with many people out there.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope whoever's listening gets some great tidbits out of this conversation.
Wonderful. What an honor it is to witness these stories from these amazing human beings, and today's guest was no exception. I invite you to think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. I can't tell you how magical it can be to set aside your expectations and just let your thoughts flow out of your head and onto paper. You don't have to have an agenda. You don't have to do anything with it, but you can be amazed at what comes out of your thoughts and onto paper and what that can do for you. I know freestyle journaling has been a powerful practice in my life for a very long time. You just never know what you might discover about yourself. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. Follow me on social media at Off the Comma, and also look for upcoming workshops and events at offthecomma.com, or better yet, go to offthecomma.com and sign up for my mailing list and let me bring the news directly to you. I am passionate about keeping this podcast ad-free so that we create a safe container for people to be able to tell their stories uninterrupted by commercials and promotions. I currently cover all the production costs, and I'm happy to continue doing so. And I'm also open to and appreciative of any donations that anyone would like to contribute. This is nothing more than to be able to support the podcast and cover some of the monthly editing and producing and equipment costs that are associated with this podcast. So look for the donations link in the podcast descriptions wherever you find this podcast. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast, and more importantly, spread the good word. If you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. As always, keep noticing.